Dust rolled across the open fields of northern Texas as the sun climbed over the horizon, cutting a line of gold through the fences of Hollow Creek Ranch. The ranch hands were already gathered near the corral, their voices low and tense as the wild stallion circled the rails like a storm looking for a place to break. He had thrown every rider who dared touch the saddle. Some said he couldn't be broken at all. And then Emily stepped forward, small, quiet, and barely tall enough to look over the gate. When she said the words, "He'll only listen to me," the men burst into laughter. But the stallion heard something else, and within seconds, the impossible began. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. By the way, where are you watching from? I'd love to know how far these stories are traveling. Testin Marisuas, and now the story continues. The morning heat hadn't yet risen, but the Texas air carried that familiar dryness, warm enough to sting the eyes, calm enough for dust to settle on the boots of anyone standing still. Hollow Creek Ranch was already alive with movement, metal gates clanging, cattle lowing in the distance, boots scraping against gravel as the hands gathered closer to the corral fence. Inside it, the wild stallion known only as Brimstone paced like a creature born from thunder. Coal-black, muscled and unpredictable, he was the kind of horse people talked about in lowered tones. No brand on his flank, no history anyone could trace. Just scars across his chest and a fire in his eyes that warned everyone to keep their distance. And yet the ranch needed him tamed, or at least contained. He had been found near the property line 3 weeks earlier, dehydrated, limping, but too dangerous to approach. Every attempt to help him had ended with shattered confidence and bruised ribs. Even Hank Dawson, the foreman with more than 30 years of riding rough horses, had walked away shaking his head. So that morning when Emily Thompson, barely 15, ponytail loose, freckles still visible under layers of dust, said she wanted to try, the reaction was immediate. "Sweetheart, this ain't a pony from a county fair," Hank said, trying to smother a laugh. Another ranch hand, Kyle Branner, nudged his friend. "She's serious," he whispered, amused. "Look at her. Girl's got fire. She's got imagination," the friend replied. Emily heard every word, but she didn't flinch. She leaned her elbows against the wooden gate and simply watched Brimstone. The others watched her watch him, confusion spreading across their faces. Why wasn't she afraid? Her father, Mark Thompson, arrived just then. He was a quiet man, known for handling cattle with the same patience he used when talking to people. He approached her side. "Em," he said softly, "this horse isn't like the ones you've worked with before." "I know," she answered. "He hasn't been listened to before." Mark exhaled. He loved that she saw things others didn't, but sometimes he wished she didn't see so much. Brimstone suddenly slammed a hoof against the gate, making 2 ranch hands jump back. Dust exploded beneath him, swirling around his legs like rising smoke. But Emily didn't move. Her gaze didn't even flicker. Hank threw his hands up. "Lord help me," he muttered. "Someone get her out of here before someone gets hurt." Emily stepped forward. "No," she said calmly. "Let me in." The laughter was immediate and loud, echoing across the open field. "In? You want to go in with that thing? You planning on becoming part of the dirt? Kid, that horse'll eat you alive." Brimstone snorted violently, stomping the ground, muscles tightening like drawn wire. Emily waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. "He's not dangerous," she said quietly. "He's scared, and he's tired of people trying to force him." Hank opened his mouth to argue, but something about the way she spoke made him pause. Maybe it was her tone, steady, grounded, not dramatic. Maybe it was the way Brimstone had stopped pacing and turned his head toward her. The men noticed it too. The horse wasn't circling anymore. He wasn't pawing at the dirt. He was staring at her. The laughter faded. "Open the gate," Emily said. Hank ran a hand over his face. "This is insane." But Mark put a hand on the foreman's shoulder. "Let her try." Hank looked at father and daughter, muttered a few things under his breath, then signaled the nearest hand to unlatch the gate, but only halfway. Emily slipped inside. The ranch fell completely silent. Her boots pressed softly into the sand. The air thickened. Even the wind seemed to hold itself still. Brimstone lifted his head higher, flaring his nostrils, eyes locked onto the girl moving toward him with steady, unhurried steps. Emily swallowed, feeling her heartbeat in her throat, but not from fear, from certainty. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She simply stood before him, letting the dust settle between them. Brimstone took one step, then another. The ground trembled slightly under his weight. Kyle whispered, No way. The black stallion stopped inches from Emily, lowering his massive head. His breath hit her face, hot, trembling, uncertain. She raised her hand slowly, giving him time to decide. And he did. Brimstone pressed his forehead gently into her palm. A sound broke through the ranch. First a sharp inhale, then disbelief rippling through the crowd like a wave. It was Hank who spoke the words everyone else was thinking. "I'll be damned." Emily let her fingers slide along the horse's jaw, feeling the tension melt beneath her touch. "He wasn't unbreakable," she murmured. "He was alone." Brimstone exhaled, long, heavy, almost relieved. And the ranch knew at that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had climbed high enough to burn the morning chill off the ranch, turning the dirt pale and dry beneath the boots of everyone still gathered at the corral. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire place had forgotten how to breathe. Inside the corral, Emily kept her hand on Brimstone's muzzle, steady and calm, even though her heart thundered in her chest. The stallion stayed close, his enormous frame softening in a way none of them had thought possible. Not even Emily's father had ever seen a wild horse melt like that. Finally, Hank broke the silence. "All right," he said, voice hoarse. "Everyone clear out from the fence. Give 'em space." It wasn't a suggestion. It was the rough, begrudging voice of a man who had just witnessed something that made him question everything he knew about horses, and maybe about people too. The ranch hands backed away slowly. Some shook their heads, some whispered under their breath, others simply stared, unable to process what they were watching. Emily kept her focus on Brimstone. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just breathed with him. Mark watched his daughter, pride climbing into his chest so tightly it almost hurt. She was her mother's child, gentle, patient, steady as the Texas horizon. Her mother had always had that effect on animals, as if they sensed something trustworthy in her quiet presence. Emily had inherited that gift, even though she never called it a gift. To her, it was simple. Animals told the truth when people didn't. Hank leaned against the fence, chewing the inside of his cheek. "This don't make sense," he muttered. But it did. Just not to the men who'd only ever learned one way to tame a horse. Emily finally stepped back, giving Brimstone a moment to choose what to do next. He blinked slowly, ears twitching toward her, then toward the open sky. He didn't run from her, but he didn't cling either. He stayed close, processing this tiny human who somehow made the storm in him settle. Emily's voice was soft, barely above the dusty wind. "You've been hurt before, haven't you?" Brimstone shifted his weight and she noticed, really noticed, the old scars along his ribs and the faint rawness around his left fetlock. Injuries from ropes, fights, maybe bad owners, maybe worse. She exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to take anything from you." The stallion lifted his head slightly, as if hearing the sincerity in her tone. Hank shook his head again. "Kid talks to that horse like he understands English." Mark replied without looking at him. "Maybe he understands her better than he understands any of us." The foreman let out a long grunt, but even he couldn't argue. Emily took a small step toward the center of the corral. Brimstone followed. It was subtle, barely noticeable to someone who didn't know horses, but every man watching knew what they'd seen. He trusted her, not fully, not blindly, but enough to move with her. "Lord above," Kyle whispered. Emily turned her back to Brimstone, not recklessly, but deliberately. She walked a slow circle along the inner fence, and the stallion stayed behind her, mirroring her path with his long, powerful strides. The men tensed. Hank lifted his hand. "Kid, don't you push your luck." Emily glanced over her shoulder. "I'm not pushing him," she replied. "I'm letting him make the choice." And Brimstone made it, step for step, quiet, watching her. Not the gate, not the men, not the open sky, just her. Mark felt a tightness in his throat. Pride, yes, but also something heavier. Because while he loved seeing her so strong, so sure, he knew the world wasn't always kind to people who trusted too deeply. After a full lap around the corral, Emily stopped near the far rail and finally turned to face the horse. "You're not a problem," she whispered. "You just needed someone to listen." Brimstone's muscles loosened. His stance widened slightly, a sign of comfort. The dust on his coat caught the sunlight, turning his black fur into a sheet of warm copper and shadow. Emily reached out again. Brimstone stepped forward, then lowered his head until his forehead pressed to her chest. A shiver ran through the watching men. Not fear, something closer to awe. Hank took his hat off, rubbing a hand through his hair. "Well," he said, voice low, "I'll be damned. She's got him. She really, actually, got him." But Emily wasn't done. She knew this moment mattered, not for pride, not to prove the men wrong, but because Brimstone deserved a beginning that didn't start with fear. She slowly raised her hand and touched his cheek again, then his neck, then the top of his mane. Each step was slow, giving him time to understand she wasn't claiming him. She was asking for permission. Brimstone flicked an ear but didn't move away. Emily then gently lifted the loose halter that had been tossed aside earlier. She didn't strap it on him. She just held it in front of her, letting him smell it. "He needs to choose it," she said quietly, mostly to herself. Brimstone sniffed the leather. His breath warmed her fingers. He didn't recoil. Mark's eyes softened. "That's my girl," he whispered. Hank straightened. All right, this is something. But she ain't riding him, not yet, not today." Emily didn't argue. "I'm not trying to." Her focus was entirely on Brimstone. She waited, still as a fence post, until the stallion nudged the halter lightly with his nose. Again, not submission, just curiosity. Emily lowered it. "We can try again tomorrow." And with that, she took a step back and walked toward the gate. The ranch hands held their breath. Would the stallion panic? Bite? Rear? Bolt? But Brimstone simply watched her go, head slightly tilted, ears following her voice even when she didn't speak. When Emily reached the gate, she slipped out without fanfare, closing it gently behind her. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You did good, Em." Emily nodded, finally letting the tension leave her body, though her eyes never left Brimstone. Hank approached her, clearing his throat. "All right, kid," he said. "I don't know what you did or how you did it, but you got a chance with him. A real one." Emily smiled, but small, as if afraid of scaring the moment away. He just needed someone to understand him. Hank crossed his arms. "Tomorrow morning, sunrise. You're working with him, under my supervision." "Okay." As the ranch hands dispersed, talking in excited half-whispers, Brimstone stood alone in the corral, watching Emily walk across the field toward the barn. His ears perked. He gave a soft, low whinny, almost calling out. Emily froze for a moment, then turned back, meeting his gaze from across the distance. A quiet promise passed between them. The first of many tests was over, but the real challenge, the one that would push her courage, her patience, and her heart, was only beginning. Hollow Creek Ranch was still asleep when Emily stepped outside the house the next morning. The sky hadn't yet found its colors. It hovered between deep blue and the faintest shade of gray, the kind of early Texas hour when the world holds its breath before the heat arrives. Crickets hummed their dwindling songs, and dew clung stubbornly to the tall grass near the fence posts. Emily pulled her denim jacket tighter around her shoulders and began her walk toward the corral. Her boots left soft impressions in the dirt, and each step carried a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Yesterday felt like some kind of miracle, but she didn't let herself depend on miracles. Horses, she knew, lived day by day. What Brimstone trusted yesterday might not be enough today. Her father had told her that once. Trust wasn't something you earned once. It was something you protected, every single day. As she passed the small barn, she saw a light flick on inside. Hank was already awake. Of course he was. The foreman never missed sunrise, especially not when something big was waiting for him. Emily hesitated for a second before stepping inside. Hank stood near the tack wall, hands in his pockets, staring at a halter he'd laid out on the workbench. It was old, the leather worn but well-oiled, the kind of piece that carried stories in its stitching. He nodded once when he saw her. "You're early. So are you." "Yeah, well." He scratched the side of his face. "Didn't sleep much. Spent half the night trying to figure how a 15-year-old girl managed to do what 5 grown men couldn't." Emily offered a small smile. "Maybe he just needed time." Hank huffed. "Then he's pickier than a bull in mating season." She laughed softly, and something in Hank's expression softened in return. He wasn't an unkind man, just a stubborn one set in the ways that had worked for decades. But even he couldn't pretend yesterday hadn't shaken the ground beneath him. He gestured to the halter. "You think he'll take it today?" Emily studied it. "I think he'll let me try." Hank nodded, accepting that answer for what it was. They walked together toward the corral. The horizon had begun to brighten, streaks of orange smearing across the sky, as if someone had brushed color lightly over a painting. A faint breeze brought the smell of hay, warm dirt, and lingering cattle. Brimstone stood exactly where she'd hoped he would, near the far side of the fence, alert but calm, ears flicking at the sounds of the waking ranch. When he spotted her silhouette crossing the field, he lifted his head. Hank muttered under his breath, "Well, look at that." Emily didn't rush. She let her steps stay slow, steady, predictable. Horses respected predictability. People often underestimated that. As she approached the corral, Brimstone didn't move away. Instead, he gave a quiet snort, soft, not defensive, and shifted his weight forward. "Can I go in?" she asked. Hank unlocked the gate but kept a firm grip on the rail. "I'm 2 seconds behind you if anything goes wrong." Emily nodded, then stepped inside. The stillness returned immediately, thick, almost sacred. The ranch was waking behind her, but in the corral, it was just her and Brimstone, like the world had narrowed into a private circle of dust, breath, and trust. "Morning," she whispered. Brimstone's ears perked toward her voice. She lifted the halter in clear view. "Can we try this again?" Brimstone walked a few steps toward her, not rushed, not anxious. His hooves brushed softly across the dirt, leaving crescent marks behind him. Emily kept her arms relaxed at her sides until he was close enough to smell the leather again. He lowered his head, breathed deeply, looked at her. "Only if you want to," she murmured. She held the halter forward, letting it hover near his chest. Brimstone sniffed it again, then nudged her wrist gently, almost impatiently, as if telling her he'd made his decision already. Emily smiled. "Okay, I'll go slow." She moved with the kind of caution that came from respect, not fear. Her fingers brushed along his cheek, then slid up his neck, curling softly behind his ears. Brimstone leaned into her touch. She could feel the warmth of him seep into her skin. Then, inch by inch, she lifted the halter toward his muzzle. Brimstone didn't move, didn't resist, didn't even blink. The leather touched his fur, and he accepted it. Hank let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for 10 years. "Well, I'll be—" His voice cracked. She did it. Emily fastened it gently, then stepped back, heart pounding as the reality settled into her. He wore it. He let her put it on. He trusted her enough to let her lead. "Brimstone," she said softly, "thank you." The stallion gave a single deep exhale, the kind that pushed dust into the morning light. Hank approached the fence. "All right, kid. That was impressive, but today we go a little further. Not riding, not yet, but we're going to test how much he'll follow your lead." Emily nodded. "Okay. Walk him around the corral. See if he sticks with you." Emily took the lead rope into her hand, not pulling, just holding. She stepped forward. Brimstone followed. The rope stayed loose. Hank whispered, "Good Lord." The pair walked the inner circle of the corral, dust kicking softly beneath their steps, the sunrise painting warm gold into Brimstone's coat. With every lap, the stallion's stride grew more relaxed. His ears turned toward her, waiting for the next cue, the next direction. Emily stopped. He stopped. She backed up. He backed up. She turned left. He turned left. Like a dance they'd practiced 100 times. Mark arrived at the fence just in time to see his daughter complete another lap. He froze, his eyes widening. "Is that—" "Yep," Hank replied. "And she—" "Yep." Mark's gaze softened, but his voice grew more serious. "This is real, then." "It's real," Hank confirmed. "And if we do this right, this horse will be the finest animal on this ranch." Emily didn't hear their whispers. Her focus stayed on Brimstone, matching his breathing, reading every flick of his ear and shift of his muscles. After several minutes, she lowered the rope and let it fall loosely. "All right," she whispered. "Your choice." Brimstone didn't walk away. He stayed by her side. Emily felt something warm swell inside her, something she couldn't quite name, but knew she'd carry for the rest of her life. Trust, earned, not taken. Hank finally spoke up. "All right, Emily. That's enough for today. We don't push a horse like him too fast. Give him time to settle with what he's learned." Emily nodded and slowly removed the halter. Brimstone blinked, relaxed, and nudged her shoulder gently before stepping back on his own. Not running, not fleeing, just giving her space. "That's his way of saying he'll see you tomorrow," Hank said. Emily rested her hands on the fence, watching Brimstone settle near the far corner of the corral once again. Tomorrow. She'd be there, and so would he. Word traveled fast in ranch country, faster than storms, faster than cattle on open ground, faster even than common sense. By noon, the day after Emily placed the halter on Brimstone, the story had already spread beyond Hollow Creek Ranch. It had started with Kyle. Kyle told his cousin told the feed store clerk in town. The feed store clerk told the woman behind him in line, who then told her husband, who told his brother, who told the man at the gas station filling his pickup. By lunchtime, 3 neighboring ranches had heard the same rumor. The wild stallion no one could touch had chosen a 15-year-old girl. People didn't know if the story was true, but everyone had an opinion anyway. Some called it nonsense. Some said the horse must have been drugged. Some said the girl must have gotten lucky. Others, the ones who had worked with animals long enough to know silence spoke louder than shouting, believed there had to be more to it. But none of them knew the truth yet. None of them had seen the way Brimstone's eyes softened when Emily approached. That afternoon, Sarah McGill, the ranch's cook, found Emily sitting on the back porch steps with a sandwich in her hands. Emily wasn't eating it, just picking at the edge of the bread as if her thoughts were too loud for her stomach to keep up. "You all right, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, lowering herself onto the step beside her with a soft groan. "You look like someone told you school starts on weekends now." Emily's lips twitched. "I'm fine, just thinking." "Mm-hmm." Sarah folded her arms. "And does that thinking have 4 legs and a bad attitude?" Emily finally smiled. "Something like that." Sarah nudged her gently. "You know, half the county's already talking about you." Emily's face flushed deep red. "Seriously?" "Oh yeah," Sarah said with a nod. "Heard at least 3 versions of what happened. In one of them, you tamed that horse by singing to him." Emily groaned. "Oh no." "In another, Hank claimed you used some kind of whispering magic." Emily rolled her eyes. "Of course he did." Truth was, Emily didn't want attention. She didn't want people looking at her like she was strange or special. She just wanted to help Brimstone, that was all. Sarah could see the worry etched across the girl's face and gently placed a hand over hers. "Listen, Em," she said softly. "Let people talk. They always will. What matters is what's real. And what's real is that you and that stallion share something rare. Something most folks wouldn't understand even if you explained it to them." Emily's voice dropped. "I just don't want them thinking I'm weird." "Honey," Sarah chuckled. "Everyone's weird. Some of us are just better at hiding it." Emily laughed quietly, and some of the tension left her shoulders. But the peace didn't last long. Saki seen Myers a truck in the distance. Late in the afternoon, as the heat began to fall off its peak and the shadows stretched long across the paddocks, a dust trail appeared far down the ranch road. A truck approached. Old, heavy, familiar. Hank spotted it first. He narrowed his eyes against the glare. "Oh, great. Here we go," he muttered. Mark wiped the sweat from his brow. "That who I think it is?" "Yep, Jed Porter." Emily, who had been brushing one of the older mares by the stable, froze when she heard the name. She didn't know much about Porter Ranch, but she knew one thing. Jed Porter didn't visit other ranches just to say hello. The truck rolled to a stop, engine rumbling before it cut off. The driver door opened and Jed Porter climbed out, a tall, leathery man with a permanent scowl and boots that looked like they'd walked through 30 years of trouble. He spat into the dirt, adjusted his belt buckle and walked toward Hank and Mark. "Heard a funny story," Jed said without greeting. "Heard y'all got a stallion that won't let nobody near him, except some kid." Hank bristled. "Who told you that?" Jed smirked. "Oh, you know, folks talk, stories travel." Mark crossed his arms. "What do you want, Porter?" Jed deliberately took his time answering. His gaze scanned the ranch like he was evaluating inventory. Finally, his eyes settled on the corral. "Well now," he said slowly, "a horse like that'd be useful. Real useful. Heard he's got strength, speed, and plenty of spirit. My ranch could use that bloodline." Emily heard every word. Her chest tightened. Hank stepped forward. "He ain't for sale." Jed raised a brow. "Didn't say he was. I just said my ranch could use him. Figure maybe I could help you all out. Offer a trade. Money, whatever you want." "Not happening," Mark said. Jed stared between the two men, then looked past them toward Emily. "So you're the girl," he said. Emily flinched but didn't step back. "Yes, sir." "You the one can handle that wild horse?" Emily held his gaze. "I guess so." Jed smirked. "Then maybe you can show me." Hank cut in fast. "No, not today." Jed chuckled low in his throat. "What's the matter, Dawson? Afraid the story ain't real?" Mark stepped beside Hank, voice firm. "This is our ranch, not yours. You want to see the horse, you come back when we say so." Jed took a long moment, then gave an exaggerated sigh. "Fine, 2 days I'll be back, and I expect a demonstration." He tipped his hat, more mockery than manners, and walked back to his truck. The engine ignited with a growl, and the vehicle disappeared down the dirt road, leaving a trail of dust behind. Emily stood very still. Hank muttered, "That man's trouble wrapped up in denim and arrogance." Mark nodded. "We'll handle him." Emily didn't say a word, but inside something churned, a worry she didn't know how to name yet. An evening at the corral, Just before sunset, Emily walked to see Brimstone again. The sky burned orange and purple, and the air cooled just enough to feel like the world was letting out a long breath. Brimstone stood near the fence, watching her before she even reached him. "Hey," she whispered. "Are you okay?" He stepped closer, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed her arm. Emily leaned her forehead against his cheek, letting the warmth and steadiness of him calm the tightness inside her chest. "You trust me," she said softly. "So, I'll protect you. I promise." Brimstone let out a quiet exhale that ruffled her hair. Emily stayed with him until the sky darkened and the stars flickered awake. Tomorrow would be another training day, but in 2 days, Jed Porter would return. And Emily had no idea what he planned to demand. What she did know, deep in her bones, was this: she wasn't letting Brimstone go. Not now. Not ever. The next morning arrived heavy with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin before the sun had even fully risen. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans as she approached the corral, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. She didn't fear Brimstone. She feared everything around him: rumors, attention, Jed Porter, and what 2 days from now might force her to prove. Inside the corral, Brimstone waited near the far fence, his ears swiveling toward her footsteps. He looked rested, calmer than the first day she had seen him standing wild and furious. Something in his posture, his grounded steadiness, gave her strength. "Hey, big guy," she murmured, slipping through the gate. "Ready for another lesson?" Brimstone stepped toward her without hesitation. Hank watched from the fence, his arms folded and his eyes sharp, but Emily noticed a hint of something new in his expression. Trust. Not trust in the horse, necessarily, but trust in her. "All right," Hank said, clearing his throat. "Today's about pressure and release. Let's see if he understands direction without the rope." Emily nodded and stepped toward the center of the corral. Brimstone followed lightly, his hooves brushing the dirt with soft, even strides. She lifted her left hand, motioning gently. Brimstone shifted left. She changed hands. He followed the cue. Hank let out a quiet whistle. "He's working off your body language, not the rope. That's rare, Emily. Real rare." Emily didn't look away from the stallion. "He listens when I stay calm." "Yeah, well, most horses listen when folks stay calm," Hank muttered. "This one listens only to you." Emily felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't respond. Brimstone nudged her shoulder then, a soft, familiar gesture she had begun to expect each morning, as if saying, "Let's work." She guided him through circles, figure eights, and stops. Brimstone didn't just respond. He anticipated, reading her posture, her breath, the angle of her shoulders. After 20 minutes, Hank finally raised a hand. "That's enough. Don't push him. Not today." Emily stopped, letting Brimstone come to rest beside her. He lowered his head, breathing against her forearm. Hank approached the rail. "You two are something," he said quietly. Emily ran her finger along the stallion's jawline. "He's trying really hard. He's trying for you." Hank shifted his weight. "And that's the part that worries me." Emily looked up, surprised. "Worries you?" Hank sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Jed Porter ain't the kind of man who walks away when he wants something. And now he wants this horse because of you." Emily's throat tightened. "But he can't take him." "Not legally," Hank said, "but pressure comes in a lot of forms. Money, influence, favors, intimidation. Men like Jed don't always play fair." Emily glanced back at Brimstone. The stallion's dark eyes followed her, calm but aware. "I won't let anything happen to him," she said. Hank watched her a moment longer, then nodded. "I believe you." A conversation in the barn. Later that day, Emily found her father in the main barn, repairing a broken gate hinge. The rhythmic clang of metal echoed through the structure. Dust floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight, piercing the old wooden walls. "Dad?" she asked. Mark looked up immediately. "Everything all right?" "Yeah. I just wanted to talk about Jed." Mark set his tools down and wiped his hands on a shop towel. "I figured you might." Emily leaned against the wooden post. "He's coming back tomorrow." "I know. And he wants to see Brimstone work." Mark nodded slowly. "Also know that." Emily hesitated, twisting the hem of her shirt between her fingers. "What if he wants more than just a demonstration?" Mark's expression softened. He stepped closer and placed a hand gently against the side of her arm. "Emily," he said, voice steady and low, "Jed Porter doesn't get to decide what happens on this ranch. He doesn't get to take what isn't his. And he sure as hell doesn't get to come after you." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not scared of him. I'm scared of what he'll try to force." Mark gave a slow nod. "Good. Fear keeps us cautious. But remember, he's only as powerful as folks let him be." Emily sighed, her shoulders finally dropping. Her father always had a way of grounding her. "Come on," Mark said gently. "Help me hold this hinge." They worked together in silence, the metal clinking softly, the smell of hay hanging in the air. Despite everything swirling around them, the barn felt like a place where time slowed down enough for Emily to breathe again. Faisi Zwadi, a visitor by the fence. Late in the afternoon, when the sun had begun slipping behind the cottonwoods, a shadow appeared by the corral. Emily approached slowly, unsure who it was at first. It wasn't anyone from Hollow Creek. It was a stranger, a woman, tall, lean, wearing a dusty blue work shirt and a wide-brim hat. She looked like she'd ridden across half the county. Emily stopped a few yards away. "Can I help you?" The woman turned. Her face was lined, not old, just weathered, like someone who'd lived a life outdoors. "You're the girl," she said simply. Emily tensed. "The girl who tamed the black stallion." The woman nodded toward Brimstone, who was grazing near the fence. "Mind if I take a look?" Emily stepped in front of the rail, protective without thinking. "Who are you?" The woman smiled slightly. "Name's Claire Reyes. I run a rescue ranch about 20 miles east. Folks talk. I heard about your horse." "He's not mine," Emily corrected. "He just trusts me. That's what I came to see." Emily hesitated, then stepped aside. Claire approached the fence slowly, respectfully. She didn't call to Brimstone, didn't make any sudden moves. She simply observed him with a calm, assessing gaze. After a long moment, she nodded. "He's been through hell," she said quietly. "More than most people would realize." Emily felt her chest tighten. "You can tell." "Scars don't lie," Claire answered. "Neither do horses who flinch at everything except one person." Emily looked down. "I want to help him." "You already are." Claire rested an arm on the fence. "Just be careful. Horses like him are gifts. People like Jed Porter see them as trophies." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You know him." "Everyone knows him," Claire said. "And you want my advice? Don't let him anywhere near that stallion." Emily nodded slowly. "I won't." Claire tipped her hat. "Good. I'll be around if you need help. My place is east of the state road. You're welcome any time." Before Emily could respond, Claire turned and walked off, disappearing into the golden haze of the late afternoon. Something about the woman comforted her, but also confirmed her fears. Brimstone wasn't just a horse people were talking about. He was a horse people might try to take. Nightfall. That evening, as the last traces of red faded from the sky, Emily returned to the corral one last time. Brimstone approached immediately, soft and quiet. "Tomorrow's the day," she whispered, "but I'll be with you no matter what." The stallion leaned into her, warm and steady, and as the crickets began their nightly chorus and the ranch lights clicked on one by one, Emily made a silent vow. She would not let anyone claim him. Not Jed Porter. Not anyone. Brimstone belonged with the people who saw him, not for his strength, not for his beauty, not for his potential, but for his heart. And tomorrow she would prove it. The morning Jed Porter was set to return arrived darker than usual. Heavy clouds rolled low over the Texas plains, turning the sky a muted steel gray. It wasn't storm weather, not yet, but the air carried that uneasy tension that made animals restless. Long before humans noticed anything was coming, Emily felt it too. She walked toward the corral at first light, her jacket pulled close, her breath visible in the cool air. Brimstone stood waiting, his black coat almost blending into the dim morning, but he recognized her steps. He always did, and lifted his head. "Morning, big guy," she whispered, slipping inside the corral. Brimstone stepped forward and pressed his muzzle gently against her chest. Emily let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Today wasn't about training. Today was about proving something. Something she didn't ask for, but couldn't avoid. She ran her hand along his cheek. "I know I'm nervous too." Brimstone shifted his weight and nudged her lightly as if telling her not to worry, but worry was all she felt. Hank's warning. Hank arrived several minutes later, boots crunching on gravel, coffee mug in one hand and his expression already sour. He rested his elbows against the fence, watching the pair in the corral. "You ready for this, kid?" Emily shook her head. "No, but I'm here. That counts." Hank took a swallow of his coffee. "Just remember, Jed's the kind of man who'll push until someone pushes back twice as hard." Emily frowned. "I won't fight him." "Didn't say fight," Hank corrected. "Said push back. Different thing entirely." Emily nodded, though she didn't fully understand. Hank sighed and set his mug on the top rail. "Look, Em, all you gotta do today is show the truth. Whatever you and that horse got, it's real. No one can deny that. But what if he tries to twist it? Emily asked quietly. Hank shrugged. Then we twist right back. Before Emily could respond, the rumble of a distant truck echoed across the open land. Hank exhaled sharply. That'll be him. Jed returns. Jed Porter's truck rolled down the long drive like it owned the dirt it drove on. Emily felt Brimstone stiffen beside her, the stallion's ears flicking forward, his posture tightening. She placed a hand on his neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you." Jed parked closer than last time. Too close. He stepped out wearing the same worn denim, the same sharp-eyed smirk, the same swagger that made Emily's stomach twist. "Well now," Jed said, stepping toward the corral. "Ain't this a picture girl and her miracle horse?" Emily didn't respond. She kept her focus on Brimstone. Mark joined them then, standing firmly between Jed and the gate. "You here for the demonstration or for trouble?" Jed grinned. "Depends on what you call trouble." Hank rolled his eyes. "Get on with it, Porter." Jed's gaze shifted to Emily. "Show me what the fuss is about." Emily swallowed hard, but Brimstone stepped forward before she could react, as if he sensed her unease and wanted to shield her from it. Jed raised his brows. "Well, I'll be damned. He really does follow you." Emily slipped the halter over Brimstone's head with the same slow gentleness she had practiced every morning. The stallion didn't resist. He lowered his head completely at ease. Jed leaned on the fence. "All right, little horse whisperer, impress me." Emily ignored the nickname. She focused only on Brimstone's eyeline, his breath, the tension, or lack of it, in his frame. "Let's show him what we practiced," she murmured. She stepped forward. Brimstone followed, rope loose. She curved left. Brimstone curved left. She halted. He halted instantly. Jed's eyes narrowed. She raised her hand gently, motioning him into a turn. Brimstone moved with her, smooth as a trained ranch horse, but with a softness none of them had ever coaxed from him. A hush fell across the small crowd that had formed. Ranch hands, Mark, Hank, and Jed, watching with varying degrees of astonishment. Emily's chest warmed with quiet pride. This wasn't a trick, this wasn't performance, this was trust. But Jed Porter wasn't the kind of man moved by trust. After several minutes, Emily stopped near the center of the corral, giving Brimstone a moment to rest. He came to stand beside her, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed her arm in that familiar, gentle way. Jed stepped forward, grabbing the top rail. "All right," he said. "My turn." Emily stiffened. Hank swore under his breath. Mark moved fast. "No," Mark said. "This horse doesn't know you, and we're not risking anyone's safety." Jed laughed sharply. "Safety? He's tame now." Emily spoke softly but clearly. "He's not tame, he trusts me." Jed shrugged. "A horse is a horse. If he's calm with you, he'll be calm with anyone." He swung a leg over the fence. Brimstone reacted instantly. His ears pinned flat, his muscles coiled tight. His head snapped up with a sharp defensive snort. Emily stepped in front of him without thinking. "Stop!" Jed froze mid-step, surprised by how quickly the stallion's demeanor had changed. Emily met his eyes, her voice no longer timid. "He's not dangerous, but he doesn't want you in here. And if you push him, he'll defend himself." Jed smirked. "Then let's see if he can be handled by someone who isn't a child." Hank slammed his hand against the rail. "She said no, Porter." Mark stepped even closer. "Off my fence." Jed hesitated, then backed down with a mocking smile. "You folks are getting awful protective of this animal." Emily put both hands on Brimstone's cheek, grounding him. His breathing slowed again. Jed tilted his head. "Fine then, horse ain't rideable yet. Probably never will be, but I'll make you a deal." "No deals," Mark snapped. Jed ignored him. He pointed directly at Emily. "You ride him, just once, and I'll walk away. Prove he's more than theatrics." Emily froze. Ride him? She had never even considered it. Brimstone wasn't ready. Their bond was real, strong, growing, but he was still healing, still finding his footing. Riding him now would be reckless, for her and for him. Mark stepped forward. "She's not riding him, not today, not to prove anything to you." Hank nodded. "This ain't a circus, Porter." Jed shrugged with a smug grin. "Then I guess everyone's little story about the miracle girl and her magic horse ain't worth much after all." The words stung Emily more than she expected, not because she cared what Jed thought, she didn't, but because she sensed he'd use this to twist the narrative, to make Brimstone sound unstable, untrainable, unwanted. And people listened to Jed Porter. Too many people. She felt Brimstone nudge her shoulder again, sensing her conflict. He looked at her with those deep, intelligent eyes, the kind that made her feel like he understood more than he should. She placed a hand on his neck, steadying both of them. "No," she said finally, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm not riding him." Jed grinned triumphantly. "But," Emily continued, taking a step closer to him, "that doesn't mean he's not worth something. It doesn't mean he's not becoming the best version of himself. He's learning, he's healing, and you don't get to rush that or judge that." Jed's smile dropped. Emily held his gaze with a calmness she didn't know she possessed. "You came here to see if the stories were true. You saw it. You saw everything. That's all you're getting." Silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Finally Jed scoffed, turned on his heel and marched back to his truck. "Keep your horse," he muttered. "Let's see how long you can keep the world away from him." The engine roared to life and the truck tore down the road, a storm of dust rising behind it. Aftermath. As the sound faded, Emily's legs trembled. She rested her forehead against Brimstone's cheek. "You did so good," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "So am I." Hank sighed. "Kid, you handled him. You handled Jed. That's something." Emily didn't feel triumphant. She felt unsettled. Jed was gone, but the tension he brought didn't leave with him. Something told her this wasn't the end of it, not even close. And as she looked out at the Texas horizon, heavy clouds gathering above them, she knew one thing with unshakable certainty. The real battle was just beginning. The air grew heavier as the hours passed after Jed Porter's departure. Clouds stacked over the plains like slow-moving mountains, building layer upon layer until they swallowed the sun. By late afternoon, Hollow Creek Ranch sat under a sky so dark it seemed ready to split open. But the storm forming outside wasn't the only one brewing. Emily leaned against the fence of the corral, watching Brimstone graze with his usual calm confidence. His presence steadied her, but the restlessness in her chest refused to quiet. She kept replaying Jed's smirk, his threats disguised as casual comments, the way he assessed Brimstone like he was nothing more than merchandise. Every time she thought of it, something tightened deep in her ribs. Brimstone lifted his head suddenly, ears flicking toward her. He sensed it. He always sensed it. "I'm okay," she whispered, though she wasn't convinced. Hank approached then, boots heavy in the dirt, hat pulled low over his brow. He didn't speak right away. He simply leaned on the fence beside her. "You handled yourself real well today," he finally said. Emily shrugged lightly. "I didn't feel like I did." Hank let out a slow breath. "That's 'cause you're still young enough to think bravery feels good." Emily looked up at him. "Bravery don't feel good, kid," Hank continued. "It feels like your stomach's been tied in 1,000 knots, like you ain't slept in weeks, like your head's full of bees. But you stand your ground anyway. That's what you did today." Emily stared at Brimstone. "I just didn't want him to get hurt. And that," Hank said, "is what makes you dangerous to men like Jed." Emily blinked. "Dangerous?" Hank nodded. "People who care more about animals than money? More about honesty than reputation? More about what's right than what's easy? Folks like Jed don't like that. Makes them feel small." Emily absorbed the words slowly. Hank pushed himself off the fence. "Storm's coming. Get him settled, then head on inside." Emily nodded and slipped through the gate. Brimstone approached her immediately, lowering his head to nuzzle her shoulder. "You and me," she murmured. "Always." She guided him into the shelter pen and closed the gate behind him, giving him a final pat before hurrying toward the house. Thunder growled in the distance. Versi tapak a dinner table doubts inside. The house smelled of Sarah's cornbread and chili, the kind of comforting scent that usually erased the weight of a hard day. But not tonight. Mark sat at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the wood, deep lines etched between his brows. Emily slid into her seat slowly. Sarah placed a bowl in front of her. "Eat, sweetheart. You need strength." Emily nodded, but didn't touch her spoon. Mark watched her for a long moment. "You did the right thing." Emily pushed her food around. "But I made him angry." "That man wakes up angry," Sarah scoffed. "Ain't your fault." Emily hesitated. "Do you think he'll come back?" Mark exchanged a look with Sarah, one of those quiet parental conversations that never needed words. "Maybe," Mark said. "He ain't the type to drop things easy." Emily swallowed hard. "So, what do?" "We do what we always do," Mark replied. "Protect our own. And Brimstone is one of ours now." Emily felt her chest warm at the words. Sarah stepped behind her and gently squeezed her shoulders. "Eat, then get rest. Tomorrow'll be clearer." Emily forced down a few bites, but her stomach twisted too tight to enjoy any of it. After dinner, she headed toward her room, but Mark called softly after her. "Em," she turned. "If that man comes back trying anything, you let me and Hank handle it. Not you." Emily nodded, but inside she knew nothing could keep her from stepping in if Brimstone was threatened. Nothing. But the night watch. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain hammered the metal roof hard enough to drown out every other sound. Wind whipped around the house, rattling shutters, groaning through the gaps in the old wood. Lightning flashed, illuminating Emily's dark room in brief, startling bursts. She couldn't sleep. Around the third hour of tossing, turning, and listening to the storm claw at the world outside, she threw off her blanket and stepped to the window. Her heart dropped. The gate near the south pasture had blown open. The wind had ripped the latch loose, and though Brimstone was sheltered in the smaller holding pen closer to the barn, the open gate made panic rise fast in her throat. She grabbed her jacket. Lightning cracked. Thunder rolled. She didn't care. She slipped out of the house quietly, boots splashing into muddy puddles as she ran across the yard. The rain stung her face like needles. Her hair whipped across her eyes, but she kept going, driven by a fear she couldn't silence. She had to check on him. When she reached the smaller shelter pen, she skidded to a stop. Brimstone stood exactly where she'd left him, body tense but grounded, head turning as soon as she approached. "Hey!" she breathed, pushing wet hair from her face. The stallion stepped toward her, his ears forward, his dark eyes sharp in the flashes of lightning. "I'm okay," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "Just had to see you." He exhaled warm breath against her cheek. For a moment, the storm faded into nothing but white noise. Emily checked the latch on his gate. It was still secure, but her attention caught on something else. Footprints. Fresh, deep, too large to be hers. And they weren't Hank's or her father's. They led from the outer fence toward the back of the barn. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been here. Her mind flashed instantly to Jed Porter. Lightning lit the sky again, and near the barn's shadowed edge, she saw something move, just a flicker, just a suggestion of a figure pulling away into the darkness. Her breath hitched. "Who's there?" she called, though her voice was almost swallowed by the wind. No answer, only rain pounding on the metal roof. Brimstone stepped close, brushing against her shoulder protectively. Emily clenched her fists. Jed wouldn't come in a storm, she told herself. He wouldn't, but something deep inside her whispered, he might. She scanned the shadows again, but whoever, or whatever, she thought she saw was gone. The rain softened slightly, and she reached up to stroke Brimstone's neck. "Someone was here," she whispered. "I know it." Brimstone snorted, muscles tightening beneath her hand. "I won't let them take you," she promised. "Not ever." Lightning streaked across the sky again, bright, violent, too close. Emily looked once more toward the barn. Tomorrow, she would tell her father. Tomorrow, they would secure the property. But right now, she stayed where she felt safest, beside Brimstone under the storm, holding on to the only certainty she had. The danger wasn't gone. It was getting closer. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving Hollow Creek Ranch soaked, heavy, and strangely quiet. Water dripped from every fence rail, mud pooled in tire tracks. The sky, pale and washed out, looked as tired as Emily felt. She hadn't slept after the storm, not even for a minute. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shape she'd glimpsed near the barn. Every flash of lightning replayed in her mind. Every rustle of wind outside her window made her sit up straight. When Emily stepped outside, damp grass soaking through her boots, she headed straight for the pen where Brimstone waited. The stallion lifted his head the moment he spotted her. "Morning," she whispered, running her fingers across the wet railing before stepping inside. Brimstone approached her immediately, brushing his nose against the side of her arm in greeting. "I didn't imagine it," she said softly. "I know someone was here." She walked the perimeter of the pen slowly, scanning the mud. And she saw them again, those same footprints, large, deep, pressed into the softened earth and leading straight toward the back barn door. Her stomach twisted. She knelt down, touching one print gently. It hadn't been washed away by the late-night rain like the rest of the ground. It was fresh, recent. Someone had been there after the storm started, too late at night for any ranch hand to be out. Emily stood and looked toward the house. She needed to tell her father. A concerned Father Mark was already at the kitchen table with his morning coffee when Emily came inside. He took one look at her damp boots, pale face, and tired eyes, and set his mug down fast. "Em? What's wrong?" She sat across from him, fingers shaking slightly. "Last night," she began. I checked on Brimstone during the storm. Mark's brows knit. You shouldn't have been out in that mess. I know, she said. But Dad, someone else was out there too. Mark leaned forward. What do you mean? Emily took a breath. I found footprints, big ones, and I saw someone near the barn, just for a second before they disappeared. He stared at her for a long, heavy moment. You sure it wasn't Hank? She shook her head. Hank wasn't wearing boots like that yesterday, and he doesn't move like that. This person, they were hiding. Mark cursed under his breath and stood. Sarah, who had just stepped in with a tray of muffins, froze. What's going on? Mark grabbed his jacket. Someone was near the pens during the storm. Sarah's eyes widened. Who would be out in weather like that? Emily didn't say it. She didn't have to. The name hung between them anyway. Jed Porter. Mark put a hand on her shoulder. You stay here. Sarah, keep an eye on her. Emily shot to her feet. Dad, I'm going with you. No, Mark said firmly. Not this time. But, Emily, his voice softened, but didn't lose its edge. I can handle this. You've already done enough. Emily clenched her fists. I'm not scared. I know, he said gently. That's what worries me. He left before she could argue again. Hank's discovery. Mark met Hank by the barn, the two men walking the muddy perimeter in silence. Emily watched from the porch, heart pounding, unable to sit still, even though she'd promised to stay put. Hank crouched near the same prints she'd found. Those ain't mine, he muttered. Ain't Mark's either. Mark nodded grimly. Matches what she said. Hank looked around. Storm blew out most tracks, but these... Yes, someone was out here during the worst of it. Emily hugged herself, watching them speak in quiet tones she couldn't hear. When Hank started walking toward the south fence line, she finally stepped off the porch. She couldn't stay away, not when Brimstone's safety was at stake. When she reached them, Hank turned. Kid, your pa said to stay inside. Say so, she shot back. Brimstone's out here. I'm not sitting in the kitchen while you look for whoever tried to sneak onto our land. Mark sighed deeply. You're too much like your mother. Emily swallowed. Is that bad? Mark's expression softened. No, that's the part of you I'm most proud of. Hank stood, brushing mud off his palms. Tracks head east, toward the boundary line. Mark nodded. Toward Porter's property. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Emily felt her pulse in her fingertips. It was him, she whispered. Mark didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Hank spat into the mud. That man's looking for trouble. And if he comes around again, Mark said quietly, he'll find it. A Brimstone's unease. Later that morning, Emily returned to Brimstone's pen. She carried a brush and tried to act normal for his sake, but she knew he sensed the change in the air. The stallion kept his head high, ears flicking, muscles tight beneath his wet coat. He kept glancing toward the eastern pasture, where the fence line met distant trees. Emily stroked his neck. You feel it too, don't you? A low rumble came from his chest. Uneasy, frustrated, alert. It's okay, she whispered. I'm right here. But the truth was, she didn't know if it would be okay. She brushed him slowly, trying to calm him, trying to calm herself. But her mind kept drifting to Jed's smirk, his threat, the figure in the storm. When she stepped back to check one of Brimstone's hooves, he suddenly jerked his head up, staring toward the far road. Emily turned sharply. A truck, far off, too far to recognize, but its engine rumbled into the quiet morning like a warning. Brimstone pawed the ground, tail lashing once. Emily's heart leaped. The truck veered away at the last second, taking a forked road away from Hollow Creek. Brimstone's stance softened. Emily exhaled in relief, but the fear remained. A visit from Claire. By midday, the sky had lightened, though the air still felt thick with a tension that wouldn't fade. Emily was brushing down Brimstone again when another figure approached the fence. This time she recognized the stance immediately. Claire Reyes. She wore the same wide-brimmed hat, same quiet confidence, but today her eyes were sharper, more focused. Heard the storm tore half the county apart last night, Claire said. Y'all all right? Emily nodded. Mostly, but someone was here. Claire's face tightened. You sure? Yes. Claire stepped closer to the fence. Where? Emily pointed toward the barn. There, and tracks going east. Claire swore under her breath. Porter. Emily swallowed hard. Everyone thinks so. Claire ran a hand through her hair, then studied Brimstone with a long, observant gaze. That man won't stop, not if he's set on something. Claire shook her head. And he's set on this horse. Emily stepped between Claire and Brimstone instinctively. He's not taking him. Claire looked at her with a mix of respect and concern. You're strong, Emily. Stronger than most adults I know, but you need to be ready. Jed Porter's got history, ugly history, with taking what doesn't belong to him. Emily clenched her jaw. What do I do? Claire exhaled. First thing, you get proof. If he steps on your land again, you catch him in the act. You take pictures, get a witness, anything you can. Men like him don't play fair, so you stay 2 steps ahead. Emily nodded, determination replacing fear. I will, she said. I promise. Claire tipped her hat. And if things get bad, you call me. I ain't afraid of that man. Emily felt a swell of gratitude she couldn't fully express. Thank you. Claire gave her a small smile. Just keep that horse safe. Something tells me his story ain't done yet. And with that, Claire walked off toward her truck, leaving Emily with Brimstone, and a growing sense of resolve. The day's end. That evening, Emily sat on the fence rail overlooking Brimstone's pen. The sky blazed with streaks of orange and pink, but she barely saw it. Her mind was locked on one promise. She wouldn't let anyone take him. Not Jed Porter. Not anyone else. Not while she could still stand between them. Brimstone walked up and rested his head gently against her knee. Emily stroked his mane and whispered, "No matter what comes next, we face it together." And as the sun dipped behind the Texas plains, Emily felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not uncertainty, but strength. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. Because Brimstone wasn't the only one learning how to stand firm. She was too. The next morning broke clear, but deceptively so. The air felt too still, too quiet, like the land itself was waiting for something. Emily felt it before she even opened her eyes. She dressed fast, grabbed her boots, and stepped outside. The sun had just begun creeping over the horizon, washing the wet fields in pale gold. Hollow Creek Ranch looked peaceful, almost untouched, but Emily's instincts told her peace was an illusion. Her legs carried her toward Brimstone before her thoughts caught up. The stallion stood tall, alert, his dark coat gleaming in the new light. But he wasn't relaxed. His stance was rigid, ears high, tail swishing with sharp, controlled movements. Emily approached slowly. "What's wrong?" Brimstone didn't step away. He never did. But he shifted uneasily, staring toward the eastern fence line, toward Porterland. Emily followed his gaze, her stomach tightening. The eastern horizon lay quiet, nothing but rolling grass and a faint shimmer of heat rising from the ground. But something felt off. Too quiet, too still, too expectant. Emily brushed her hand down Brimstone's neck. "I know. I feel it too." To the broken fence, Hank found them 15 minutes later, striding across the yard with a grim expression. "Em," he called, "I need you to stay put for a bit." Emily's chest tightened. "Why? What happened?" Hank rubbed his jaw. "Your dad's out checking the boundary line. South fence collapsed last night." Emily's pulse stuttered. "Collapsed how? The storm?" "Maybe." Hank didn't look convinced. "Maybe not. Was anyone hurt? Did any cattle get out?" "No, we rounded them up, but the breaking point didn't look natural." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "Do you think—" "I'm not saying anything yet." Hank's voice was tight. "But your dad'll confirm soon." Brimstone let out a sharp snort, pawing the ground. Emily stroked him gently, but he didn't settle. Hank watched the pair of them and shook his head in disbelief. "That horse sees more than any of us." Emily nodded. "He knows something's wrong." "Yeah," Hank muttered, "and I'm starting to trust his judgment more than mine." The Mark's return. It took an hour before Mark returned, his truck rumbling up the dirt path, mud splattered all over the tires. Emily rushed toward him the moment he parked. "What did you find?" she asked. Mark stepped out slowly. Too slowly. Something was wrong. Hank joined them. "Fence didn't fall on its own, did it?" Mark shook his head. "Cut clean. Wire sliced right through." Emily's stomach dropped. "Cut? With what?" "Bolt cutters," Mark said. "Industrial ones." Hank spat into the dirt. "Porter." Mark didn't confirm it, but the silence said enough. Emily felt Brimstone pressing against her shoulder. She rested her hand on his muzzle, grounding herself. "Dad, what do we do now?" "We fix the damage," Mark said, "and we make sure he can't get closer." Emily swallowed. "What about the law?" Mark crossed his arms, expression tight. "We can call the sheriff, but Jed Porter's smart. He leaves no tracks he can't deny." "There were footprints," Emily said quickly. "By Brimstone's pen." Mark nodded. "And the storm washed half of them away." "It's not enough." Emily felt anger burn at the back of her throat. "So he gets away with it." Mark looked her straight in the eyes. "Not forever." But strength in the yard. Later that afternoon, Mark and Hank prepared to reinforce the fence. Emily helped where she could, bringing wire, holding posts steady, checking tension. Brimstone stayed nearby, pacing along his pen as if keeping watch. At one point, Mark paused and looked over at his daughter. "You don't leave his side much anymore," he said gently. Emily wiped sweat from her forehead. "Not until this stops." Mark nodded. "I know you're scared." "I'm not scared," she said quietly. "I'm angry." Mark studied her face. "Both can live in the same place." Emily looked toward Brimstone. "I'm not letting him disappear. I'm not letting someone steal him in the middle of the night. I'm not losing something again." The last words slipped out too fast, too honestly, and Emily instantly wished she could pull them back. Mark's expression softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you miss your mother," he said, "and I know losing her makes everything else feel more fragile." Emily looked down. Her chest tightened painfully. "But Brimstone's not going anywhere," Mark continued. "Not while I'm alive. Not while you're here. We're a team, Em. We protect what's ours." Emily swallowed hard and nodded, blinking away the heat building behind her eyes. Brimstone whinnied softly, as if echoing the promise. A warning in the dirt. By late afternoon, Mark and Hank finished reinforcing the fence. Emily went back to Brimstone's pen, eager for a quiet moment with him, but as soon as she reached the gate, she froze. Something was on the ground, half buried in mud, metal. She crouched and pulled it free. A bolt cutter blade, broken off at the hinge, still sharp, still gleaming like it hadn't been there long. Her heart started pounding. Someone had dropped it. Someone had been inside the fence line, close, too close. Brimstone pinned his ears back and stepped between her and the fence rail, protective, tense. Emily stared at the blade, shock fading into rage. This wasn't a threat. This was a message. Deliberate, quiet, dangerous. She stood, gripping the metal tightly. Her father and Hank were already walking toward her when they saw the look on her face. "What's wrong?" Mark asked. Emily held up the broken cutter plate. Hank's face blanched. "Where the hell did you get that?" "Right here," Emily said, "inside the fence." Mark's jaw clenched so tightly she heard his teeth grind. "That's it," he said. "He crossed the line." Emily nodded, clutching the blade, holding Brimstone steady with her other hand. "This isn't random," she whispered. "This isn't curiosity." Hank shook his head slowly. "No, this is escalation." Brimstone snorted, muscles bunching beneath his coat. Emily took a slow breath, steadying herself. "If Jed Porter wants a fight," she said quietly, "then he picked the wrong ranch." Nightfall resolve. The sun dipped low, painting the fields deep orange. Emily sat on the top rail of the fence, Brimstone resting his head against her leg. The bolt-cutter blade rested in her hand. Everything felt different now, sharper, more urgent. "Tomorrow," she whispered to Brimstone, "we make a plan." The stallion breathed softly against her knee. "And I won't let anyone hurt you," she whispered. "Ever." The wind swept across the plains. The ranch lights flickered on, and for the first time since Brimstone arrived, Emily felt something change deep inside her. She wasn't just protecting him anymore, she was preparing for whatever came next. The morning of the final confrontation arrived without fanfare. No storm, no clouds, no warning. Just a calm, deceptively gentle Texas dawn, the kind that almost felt like forgiveness, even when nothing had been forgiven. Emily barely slept, not because she was afraid, but because she was ready. She had spent half the night thinking, planning, replaying everything that had led them here. The laughter the first day she said Brimstone would listen to her. The moment he lowered his head into her palm. The storm. The figure in the dark. The bolt-cutter blade left like a taunt in the mud. This wasn't something she could ignore anymore. Brimstone stood waiting by the fence when she stepped outside, ears forward, muscles alert. He knew something was coming long before she did. Emily stroked his mane. "Today we end this." Brimstone exhaled deeply, brushing his muzzle against her shoulder. The Mark's decision. When she turned toward the barn, she found her father and Hank already there, leaning over the hood of Mark's truck. The broken bolt-cutter blade sat between them like a piece of evidence. Mark straightened. "Emily, we're going to the sheriff today. That's not up for debate." Hank gave a low grunt. "And after that, we pay Jed a visit." Emily shook her head. "Going to him won't stop anything. Men like Jed don't act because they need something. They act because they want control." Hank frowned. "So what do you suggest, kid? We wait around for him to sneak in again?" "No," she said firmly. "We make sure he can't." Mark crossed his arms. "Explain." Emily took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "He's coming after Brimstone because he thinks we can't stop him. Because he thinks he can intimidate us, so instead of hiding or reacting, we show him he's wrong." Hank blinked. You're saying we confront him. I'm saying we confront him where everyone can see, Emily replied. Where he can't twist the story, where he can't pretend he wasn't here, where he can't pretend Brimstone isn't mine to work with. Mark's eyes softened. You're smarter than I give you credit for. She swallowed. I'm tired of being scared. And I'm tired of him thinking he can take what he wants. Hank nodded slowly. So what's the plan? Emily looked toward Brimstone. We show the whole town exactly who he responds to, and exactly who Jed Porter is. At the gathering. It didn't take long. Word traveled fast. Faster than fear, faster than threats, faster than rumors. By late morning, pickups lined the dirt road leading into Hollow Creek. Ranchers, neighbors, feed store workers, farriers, even Claire Reyes pulled up. People who had heard bits and pieces of the story now came to see for themselves. But more importantly, Jed Porter came too. He didn't hide it this time, didn't sneak, didn't lurk. His truck roared up the drive like a challenge, dust flying behind him. He stepped out with a slow, deliberate swagger, clearly pleased with the audience. Well, Jed drawled, looks like I ain't the only one interested in your miracle horse. Mark stepped forward. You're here because you forced our hand. Jed smirked. Forced? No, I simply made a request. If y'all want to turn that into something else, that's on you. Claire crossed her arms. Cutting a fence line isn't a request. Jed's smile fell for half a second too long. Enough for everyone to see the truth behind it. Emily stepped forward before he could recover. You came because you thought no one could stop you, she said. But now everyone's watching. Heads nodded. People murmured. Jed's jaw tightened. So, he sneered, what's this all for? Some little show? Emily motioned to the corral behind her. This is for clarity. She stepped inside. Brimstone lifted his head instantly. Ears pointed toward her. The watching crowd fell silent. Emily whispered, You ready? The stallion's breath warmed her hand. Then he stepped forward, calm, steady, choosing her without hesitation. Emily led him through the movements they'd practiced for weeks. Circles, stops, turns, backing, soft cues. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just trust made visible. People watched in quiet amazement. Hank leaned against the fence, smiling. Claire watched with her arms crossed, a rare look of something like pride on her face. Even Mark, calm and grounded as ever, couldn't hide his sense of awe. Emily let the final moment sit, a quiet halt, Brimstone standing so close his forehead touched her shoulder. Then she turned to Jed. This, she said, is not something you can buy, and it's not something you can steal. The crowd murmured again. Jed clenched his jaw. You think this proves anything? It proves everything, Emily replied. You wanted to take him. You tried to intimidate us. But you can't take a horse who chooses where he belongs. And he doesn't choose you. Brimstone snorted sharply, as if punctuating her words. Jed opened his mouth, but the sheriff's truck pulled up at that exact moment. Dust swirled. Doors slammed. Sheriff Dawson stepped out, eyes cutting straight toward Jed. Got some questions for you, Porter. Jed stiffened. Questions? Fence cutting, the sheriff said. Trespassing, vandalism, reckless endangerment. We're going to talk about all of it. The crowd shifted. People whispered. Jed's confidence cracked. You can't prove. We got footprints, Hank said. Broken cutter blade, Mark added. And a witness, Emily finished. Jed's eyes snapped to her. You saw nothing. Emily held his gaze steadily. I saw enough. The sheriff stepped closer. Jed Porter, you can come with me easy or hard, but you're coming. Jed's shoulders sagged under the weight of a truth he could no longer dodge. He muttered a curse, then climbed into the patrol truck, slamming the door behind him. As the sheriff drove away, the tension that had held the ranch hostage for days finally broke. The crowd exhaled. People clapped Emily's shoulder. Claire smiled at her. Hank gave a proud whistle. Mark wrapped an arm around her. You did it, he said softly. Emily shook her head. We did it. A new beginning. Later, after the last truck pulled away and the sun began its slow descent over the fields, Emily returned to Brimstone's pen. The stallion walked toward her immediately, stopping close enough for her to rest her forehead against his. You're safe now, she whispered. Really safe. Brimstone breathed deeply, warm and steady. Emily let her hand slide along his jawline. We did it together, didn't we? The stallion gave a soft, low rumble, a sound she'd come to know meant trust, calm, and connection. Emily leaned into him, letting the moment settle into her heart like a promise. He tried to take you, she whispered. But he didn't understand something important. Brimstone's ear flicked. "You're not just a horse," she said softly. "You're home." And as the Texas sun dipped behind the horizon, Emily knew this was only the beginning, not of conflict, not of fear, but of a bond strong enough to weather whatever life brought next. Brimstone had chosen her, and she had chosen him, not because of miracles, not because of magic, but because of something far more powerful: trust, forged in patience, strengthened by hardship, and proven in the light of day. The dust finally settled at Hollow Creek Ranch, and a girl and her once wild stallion stood together, unshaken, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next.